She was unclean, unseen, and unwelcome, but her touch stopped Jesus in his tracks. What made Jesus stop, turn, and call her daughter? This is part 36 of our series. We're exploring Mark chapter 5, verses 25 through 34. Look at verses 25 and 26 from the English Standard Version of the Bible. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. When did this happen? A man named Jairus asked Jesus to come and heal his dying little daughter, and Jesus, surrounded by a large crowd, was on his way to Jairus' house. Jairus described her as his little daughter, signaling that she was a prepubescent girl. Now, a grown woman with a grown woman's problem breaks onto the scene. She's had an issue of blood, a hemorrhage, or perpetual menses for 12 years. She has desperately spent all her resources seeking healing, and has only gotten worse. In Jewish law, a menstruating woman is temporarily unclean in a ceremonial and social sense. She can't socialize. She can't go to synagogue. She can't be in contact with people without making them unclean. This woman has been through 12 years of isolation and economic ruin. Interestingly, we learn in Mark chapter 5, verse 41, that Jairus' daughter is 12 years old. These two stories must be thought of together. Let's move on to verses 27 and 28. She had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." What does Mark want us to know about her? She heard about Jesus. One of the themes in Mark's Gospel is, "Let those with ears to hear, hear." When this desperate woman heard about Jesus, his healing and casting out of demons, she believed that he could grant her relief and restoration. How much did she believe? She believed that if she could even touch his cloak, his outer garment, that would be enough to cure her. Of course, she knows that a hemorrhaging woman touching Jesus is a defiling act. So she settled on just touching the hem of his garment, down near the ground, without calling any attention to herself. On to verse 29. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. When did it happen? Immediately. Mark loves that word. Why does it matter that she was immediately healed? It wasn't a course of medical treatment. It wasn't the natural process of menopause. This was an instant and complete end of the hemorrhage and healing of its cause. When did her 12 years of suffering and isolation end? Immediately upon touching Jesus' cloak. Let's move on to verse 30. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" This verse can easily be misunderstood. It sounds like Jesus was a passive participant in the miracle, but that's not at all what is happening. The Greek word that is translated perceiving is epignos and means being fully aware. So, what is the point? Jesus was fully aware of the woman, her touch, and the exercise of healing power on her behalf. As soon as she was restored, what did Jesus do? He immediately turned to the crowd and asked, "Who touched my garments?" If he was fully aware, why ask who touched him? So that the lesson of the woman's faith isn't lost in an anonymous and secret healing. Jesus isn't a lucky charm or a magic rock that you rub for healing. So Jesus insists on identifying her, for her good and the good of the crowd. How can we know this? Look at verses 31 and 32. And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. The disciples are shocked by his question. Why? The crowd is large and pressing in on them. Surely Jesus has been touched by countless people, but only one has been healed, and Jesus was fully aware of that healing. So he kept looking for the woman. We can't move on and heal the 12-year-old girl until we identify the woman with the 12 years of struggle and isolation. On to verse 33. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. Why in fear and trembling? With her former medical condition, touching people was a religious crime. It was defiling. In fear and trembling, she fell down before him. People falling down before Jesus is becoming common in Mark's Gospel. And she told him the whole truth about her situation and what she had done. But remember, Mark told us that Jesus was fully aware. So this explanation by the woman isn't for Jesus' benefit. It's for the benefit of those who hear. Let those with ears to hear, hear. If she had sneaked away silently and secretly, she could have misunderstood Jesus. And more importantly, the might of this miracle would remain unknown to the crowd and to Mark's audience. Everyone who heard her understood her prior terrible situation and that Jesus had healed her, restoring her to a fullness of life. Let's wrap up with verse 34. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Jesus called her daughter. So what? He was on his way to heal Jairus' daughter when this interruption caused him to stop. But he's here for grown-up daughters as well as little girls. He tells her that her faith, which we were told was based on what she heard about Jesus, made her well. He told her to go in peace. Be free from the conflicts of your former condition. And this translation says, he told her to be healed of her disease. But she was already healed of her disease. What the Greek says is, be well of your disease. Without getting too technical, it implies stay well, or keep being well. It's like wishing her a life free of her former suffering. A life of suffering and isolation was replaced with peace and wellness because of her faith in Jesus. Let's get to some so whats. The story of Jairus' daughter and the woman with the hemorrhage should be considered together. How do we know? There are two females in the same long passage. Both stories involve a reference to 12 years, and both females are called daughter. These are not coincidences. The resurrection of the prepubescent girl and the healing of the grown woman with the hemorrhage tell Mark's audience something incredibly important about Jesus, the Messiah. In a time and culture that didn't treat girls and women as equal to men and frequently overlooked them, Jesus restores one daughter to life literally and another figuratively. So what? Jesus isn't just the Messiah for men. He offers hope, healing, restoration, and fullness of life to girls and women too. In our next video, Jesus faces opposition in his hometown. Thank you for watching So What Scripture. Please subscribe to the channel and share this video.